Welcome back, everyone. Boy, have we got a treat for you now. We have 7 people here on the stage for a debate, products versus business models. I'm going to hand over to Nilesha Chauvet, who is Managing Director of Good, a purpose-driven strategy and creative agency, and I believe she's going to take great control over the 6 people in the session. So over to you for a lively debate.
Well, thanks so much, and a very warm welcome to what is being described as an intellectual showdown. I've got 2 sides here. They can't agree on anything, and they've been fighting outside, so hopefully they'll be very well behaved. My friend Lisa here, she described the workshop that she was in as an AA meeting for designers. So this is going to be really interesting. So we promised you an intellectual showdown where 2 opposing sides are coming together to propose why their approach is the most effective in helping us to achieve our nature positive outcomes. Because it's not just about net zero, it's about nature positive, and it's about regenerative strategies. So the context for this debate is obviously the world that we're living in. And if you've seen the news today, you will know very much about the world that we're living in. The climate crisis, the extraordinary seismic changes that are happening at a social level. But this is the most extraordinary time for design and creativity. It may not feel like it, but it really is, on every level. How do we ensure that design moves us forward? How do we ensure that we are all moving in the same direction? We need a little bit of focus, don't we? So through the lens of speed, because we need to move fast, scale, because we need to move at scale, cost, because everybody complains that it's too expensive, impact, because it needs to be measurable, representation, diversity, and inclusion and lived experience, because we need to make sure that the right voices are at the table. Which side is going to be most effective in helping us to achieve the outcomes that we want? Is one side more impactful than the others? Who knows? Or are there simply natural tensions that will exist along the way between products, those who design products, those who run businesses and organize change systems? Are there cross-pollinations? Is there learnings? Can a single product change an entire organization? Can an organization influence the outcome of a product? Well, you'll have to wait and see. So, on one side, which is my left, we have the business model team who advocate that business models drive organizational and systemic change, and we've talked a lot about that, haven't we? More than isolated product design improvements, and that there are accumulated benefits to that. That business models can revolutionize business practices by placing nature at the heart of corporate strategies. That open sourcing tools enhances collaboration, allows us to invest in equity, better supports culture shifts within organizations. So, would you like to introduce yourself? Could you state your name, tell us where you work, what you do, because nobody here has a clue, and also tell us why your work is so important. So, starting on this side. Effia.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so my name is Effia. I am the founder and CEO of Black-owned Studios and Marketplace. And we are the UK's first Afro beauty co-working space, Black-owned beauty marketplace, and community event space combined. What we do is important because we're all about bringing diverse voices to the table, like we've been talking about today, or about to talk about today anyway. And about how we can basically make differences in the beauty industry specifically.
Thank you very much. Over to you.
I'm Pete Swift. I'm co-founder and managing director of Planet. I am a landscape architect, which for those people who don't know what we do, we are the designers of outside. The business covers a group of linked skill sets around landscape architecture, urban design, computer modelling and creative engagement to work with nature and communities to bring about good positive, regenerative, green change. But the other reason why I'm here is I'm also the co-founder of a B Corp, one of the early B Corps in the built environment world. And we've used that process and that journey to help us essentially rewire the entire business. We have a brand new operating system that is built around our B Corp values and certification to give us that comfort and confidence to drive towards becoming a regenerative business, so to move beyond sustainable.
Okay, excellent. And over to you.
Hi, I'm Simeon Rose. I'm Creative Director of Faith in Nature. We are a natural personal care company based right here in Manchester. And in 2022, we made nature a director of our company, giving the natural world a voice and a vote. And before I get to the end and forget to say this, I just want to say we've open sourced that entire model as well, so that you can do it too.
So we'll be learning more about that in just a second. Okay, so over to my right is the other team, the product team, who advocate that products tackle frontline business needs while championing sustainability, that significant carbon savings can be generated at a product level, that design strategies and circularity built in has tangible benefits, such as lightweighting products can make sustainable options irresistible. And it just takes one product, the right product at the right time, made in the right way, to really make a difference and to change the world. So could you do the same? Introduce yourself, tell us your name, where you work, what you do, and why it's important.
Hi, my name is Richard Hall. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called PDM. We are a design, innovation and sustainability consultancy. We've been around almost 20 years. 90% of what we do is health tech. The reason why I think product is particularly important is because as designers we are helping leadership teams within organisations to mobilise around medical devices and life sciences. So the NHS created its roadmap 2045 for net zero, and we are helping companies to understand what that means and how they adopt it and how they approach it.
Fantastic, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Henderson. I'm co-founder and managing director of ILCA. We are a branding studio based up in Scotland, token Scottish person. But yeah, we are Scotland's first B Corp branding studio, and I think we're incredibly proud of that accreditation. It's a way that we worked without knowing in terms of really questioning briefs, annoying clients in terms of what they were asking us to deliver. And I think probably the simplest way to put what we do is we just clarify complex information and put it to you in a very meaningful, simple, connective way.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Bernice Pan. I am the founder and chief creative officer of Deploy, which is a multiple award-winning 360 sustainability fashion company. And I am actually originally trained as an architect and specialize as a design systems engineer with a doctorate in this field. And I set up the company 18 years ago with the R&D developed only for the purpose of reforming fashion for 360 sustainability. Thank you. We're one of the highest scoring B Corps in the world.
As you can see, both
We're all
sides.
on the same side.
Everyone's on the same side. Both sides think they're terribly important. So time is very short, but disagreement is plenty, let me tell you. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to centre the discussion around three key tensions. So let's start with the first. So one of the big challenges in sustainability is allowing space and time for creativity and, importantly, experimentation, bringing in diverse voices, making sure that we're not speaking in an echo chamber, but that actually we've got the right voices at the table in the first place to have the conversation. But we also have the tension of time pressure because things cannot wait. So how do we reconcile this? I'm going to come to you, Simeon, firstly, because you've put nature on the board, which is extraordinary. So why was that important to Faith in Nature, and how has that in some way, or it's a question, has that inflated the cost of your products? Because it sounds great in theory, but if I'm paying more for your shampoo, then I might have a problem with that. So talk me through that.
Okay. So we're 50 years old. Faith in Nature has been a green company this whole time. But green today is a very different thing, right? It's difficult knowing what to do. And a few years ago, we were there going, I'm from a creative background, I'll own this, being asked to input on logistics, on supply chains, on targets, and all the rest of it. It's really hard. And yet, we're given a vote, we're given the opportunity to say, oh, the best green thing to do is this or that. And we all get to have a say, marketing, ops, all the usual functions. But the only voice missing in that whole process is actually nature's own. And as we became more and more interested in the rights of nature movement and frameworks that allow aspects of the natural world to have a legal voice, like rivers becoming legal people and the likes of, we thought, well, if that framework can exist outside of business, why can't it also exist within business? And why can't nature help guide us through this process? So that's why it's important for us. Because legally speaking, we can all design for planet spiritually perhaps, or in the spirit of doing so, but legally we're not. Legally we're designing for humans and shareholders. If we're going to actually design for nature, then it makes sense, doesn't it, to recognize the bigger stakeholder in a legal sense. Does that make things more expensive in the end? I think what's more expensive actually is making mistakes and constantly having to ask forgiveness, whether you see that as like offsetting or whatever it is at the end. And so what we're trying to do is flip it on its head and instead ask forgiveness at the end, ask permission at the beginning, and have a bit more of a grown-up conversation and go, actually, can you help us along the way? So I would counter that it doesn't make things more expensive, it makes them more efficient.
Interesting. Nature is speaking, he says. Are we listening, is the question. So, Afia, we've talked about voices, haven't we? Important voices, creating space for essential voices, and making space for black voices in particular is really critical. There is a real absence of that, I think. But how do you ensure that those businesses are tangibly flourishing longer term?
I think when we think about longer term, we need to make sure that we have the right foundations to start with. That's something that we're really trying to push at our studios. So we provide flexible co-working spaces for Afro hairstylists and beauticians, and that flexibility allows that growth and allows people to be able to kind of develop all the way around their business without having the stress of a long-term lease or contract. In terms of the being able to kind of create those like long-term futures, so it's not just that flexibility, but it's also the accessibility and the visibility. What we do is we're basically tapping into a whole community that wants to be able to kind of access these either black stylists and beauticians or black beauty products and support black business owners. And so being able to kind of create that safe space is really vital for making sure that we're able to kind of bring up those voices, because we're basically feeding back into that same system there.
Yeah, creating stronger foundations, flexibility, accessibility, very, very important. Can you top that is the question. So Richard, you're involved in creating products that focus on really important areas like health technology, life science, medical devices, and you've said that some of the work that you do produces products that are focusing on carbon and cost reduction, but increased profitability. That is a brilliant formula. Is there a tension between that and the need to ensure that you are involved in creating products that are more emotionally resonant and give space to essential voices?
I think there can be a tension if the correct process is not taken. So the reason why I think product design is particularly important is that you can reduce the cost of a product, but you can still at the same time increase the value. So I'll give you an example. You know, we work very heavily in medical devices. I'll give you an example of a heart medical device we've worked on. Working with the surgeons to optimize the product. So does it need to have that modality? Does it need to be that kind of size? Can it be optimized? Can we lightweight it? So working with the actual users at the start of the journey and embedding them in the process you can actually increase the value, the perceived value of a product, but also at the same time reduce its cost. And this is where the value of design comes into its own.
He makes a very compelling case, doesn't he? So Bernice, coming to you now, there's lots of experimentation and collaboration needed in fashion, and in particular at a sort of garment level. And yet Deploy is a brand set out to reform fashion across the sector. So how do you reconcile the two? Which end is driving the change? Is it the clothes or is it the company?
Well, we reconceptualize clothing as an interface for care, not just as a commodity of consumption. And because none of us, however woke we become, we will never walk out of the door just stark naked. And so actually all of us have an affinity, deep affinity with our clothing. And that's how I actually turned from an architect to a clothing designer. I call myself a clothing architect because you can walk in and out of this amazing building a million times and not notice the differences of the thoughtfulness that has gone into it. But you will put on something straight away, you have an opinion about it. So you would never put washing a liquid to wash your face. Why would you put toxic chemical that is abrasive to the skin and materials that is harmful to the planet on your body every single day? So that's how we actually start our first design principles, is how can we actually use clothing as an interface for care, using the minimal resources to create maximum benefit as well as profit. And how do we actually solve problems that are actually just not being even looked at in clothing? Women, tights fall down your crotch, and then they just don't stay up. Not good enough. Don't design it. Don't make it. You know, arms that are actually not covering your bicep when you start lifting weights. Not good enough. Don't do these kinds of menswear. So I think the first principle of design is if an item isn't good enough and actually doesn't solve a problem or improve a condition, designers, let's not produce it, because there's too much waste under the sun. 35% of the waste comes from pre-consumer. So if we can even actually just reduce that to 5% waste, which yesterday we just won Best Zero Waste Fashion Brand as the Future Icon Award. So we have a thing or two to share about zero waste. If we can reduce that 30% waste and increase actually paying our workers and better materials, natural materials, we are still 10, 20% more profitable than those companies that just do the same thing. And I can't wait to share with Zara and Shane about how we do it and how they can do it too, to make it really fast, how we turn 100 billion garment waste into 50 and into 20. And I'll explain how later.
Fantastic. Yeah, you make it compelling. Clothing as an interface for care. I love that. Somebody should speak to Sheen about that.
Yes.
Immediately. Okay, so Pete, let's come to you. Let's talk about co-creation and lived experience in your world then. How important is that when designing regenerative spaces and places?
Well, I don't know if you knew this when you put this question together, but I can answer with a real living case study that's outside this window. Because for the last 2 years, we've been working with MMU to repurpose their campus spaces. So, you know, people talk about reuse of clothing, people talk about deep retrofit of buildings. For the last 2 years, MMU have been refitting All Saints Park and Grosvenor Square. And one of the key principles that came from our own team back to the university in the beginning was, how much of what's there can we use again? Now, normally it would be, I want to create something beautiful and great. I want to import a load of materials from China or Portugal, and I don't really care about where the provenance of the benches come from, whatever. So by hardwiring through the business's drive towards regenerative practice, by creating toolkits for our team, by creating a bespoke learning and development program, reaching out to grow an expert network to help us, we were able to say to the university, you might want something sparkling and new, but 50% plus of what is going to make it new and emblematic is already here. So that mindset shift comes from making sure that your team feel empowered and confident enough. And so that's a really complex thing. You're essentially asking, with an eye on carbon reduction, climate adaptation, for your designers, your artists, people with degrees that have got BA after their name, to think like scientists. And so if you don't teach and embed that at the base of your business, then it just becomes kind of green fluff, doesn't it? It's not deeply rooted. And I think, Simeon and I are knitted together by a number of things, but that understanding of nature and natural systems is at the heart of our business models. It's not a thing that we like. Everybody likes nature and green space and the ability to. But what you've got here is something that enabled the client to learn, us to learn, the supply chain to learn, the students to learn. So it's really clear, manifested in the way that typography and signage works, that they are in somewhere that used to exist in a different form, and the materials have made the new thing.
He makes a very compelling case, because we're sitting and enjoying the space that you've had some part in helping to design and create. So Lisa, let's come to you.
Hello.
You've got a lot to answer for. You work in advertising and communications, and it can be phony, can't it? So persuading people to buy things they don't need. Many of those stories peddled by a very few gatekeepers. How can we challenge consumption habits using the techniques that got us into trouble in the first place? How can we tell more integrated stories?
Ooh, very good questions. I think, just as a disclaimer, I did start an advertising anonymous group in one of the workshops, so get in touch if you want to be part of that. But yeah, I think some of the key themes today have really sort of, put a fire in my belly, because it keeps coming back to value. And I think, how do you meet people where they are, show the value that is in that product or service? And I'm talking about planet. How do we show value to planet? How do we onboard stakeholders that, quite frankly, couldn't care and don't want to integrate it in the business model, down to the end user who probably doesn't even need to know it's sustainable? So I think it's about us coming in, quite frankly, with a bit of ignorance, and really pulling apart that business or that product to understand, one, why people should care, and two, what do they need to know, and three, how are we going to get them that information? So, remind me of your question. Just a rant.
How can storytelling be more inclusive to ensure that we're representing the voices that really matter?
Yeah, so I think going back to that point of value, it is really just understanding that not everyone's coming at it with their own agenda, their own viewpoint, and how do we meet people where they are? And I think there's a real art in storytelling that is, needed to sort of really accelerate change. I think we've all said today how important language is in this journey. We're all using language. Richard, you said today, so nice to be in a room hearing the words regenerative and, all these words that are so in our inner psyche that no one else really communicates or perhaps understands. And that, to me, is a problem, because we're just preaching to each other, and how do we get that to the people that need to, understand and behave differently?
Yeah, I've said it once and I'll say it again. Brilliant communication will change the world. So you can have a brilliant business model or you can have a brilliant product, but if you can't talk about it, game over. So maybe the debate's over. No. Okay, all right. So let's talk about another area of tension, and that is delivering tangible, measurable impacts. So we've got to do things properly, don't we? Because that's really important. We've got to make longer-term changes. We need to have a longer-term perspective. But we need change to happen now. So how do we resolve that tension? Simeon, I'm going to come to you. Putting nature on the board, transformational. Can the benefits of this be measured to provide a really strong case study for others to follow?
Okay, so faith in nature, as I said, is 50 years old. In that 50 years, biodiversity has declined by 69% globally. So that's the case for life. And then people go, but what about the case for business? And you go, okay, well, how about a case for business then too? And so this comes back to a question about diversity, right? There's the nature-based case. This is born out of the rights of nature movement. That's the case for that. Internally, though, who's going to stand up and really be that voice? In the earlier debate, Martin Evans said that, you know, even in these big companies with many shareholders, it's not that we don't care, we just don't, you know, perhaps we don't know what to do. And if you don't know what to do, like, maybe it makes sense to ask for help. Maybe those people are not the people who have been CMOs and CEOs and all the rest of it for all this time, because perhaps they've been out in the field learning about the natural world more, and now they arrive at a point of going, well, there's no place for me in the room. Even if I'm from whatever background I'm from, you're still trying to squeeze people into the same, into the same roles. So perhaps we need to create a different role. That role is, in our case, a nature guardian role, legally representing the more than human entity that is nature. And it's a rotating cast of people. It allows for Indigenous perspective, First Nations perspective, ecologist perspective, lawyers perspective, artists, poets, children, all the voices that there is otherwise no way of getting into that room, because they weren't the ones that created this mess, but perhaps getting their perspective in the room will get us out of it. So I would argue that's the case, the business case for it. And by the way, also built into our model, at the end of each year, we publicly report on everything that we've done. So we've just come to the end of our second year, and we have reported everything that we have done, and I think there are a number of business cases in there for adopting it. But also, why not?
Yeah, and just to clarify, you've open sourced your business model, haven't you, so others can learn how you did it?
Yeah, faithinnature.co.uk/a vote for nature. The entire framework is there, developed by Earth Law Centre in the US and Lawyers for Nature here in the UK. Pick it up, have a play around with it.
Fantastic. So Afia, let's come back to diversity and inclusion, because it's riddled with issues on measurement, isn't it? So how does your approach speed things up, and how can you measure it?
Yeah, I think in terms of diversity inclusion, actually trying to measure that impact is difficult. But what we're seeing in kind of recent years is that we're getting more reports on the potential to impact, which is really important. So that's the work of the Treasure Chest Trend report, for example, the Black Pound report, for example, that is showing that in the diversity sector there is a huge potential for impact and the huge spending power of those communities. In terms of what we do in terms of our approach, so what we do is basically based on flexibility. You know, being able to create a business model that allows people to be flexible. It means that we're able to kind of transfer all of the ideas, the adaptability of our mission, our goals, our mentality as a community is being able to be filtered through into a community that really wants to connect with us, wants to be empowered by us, and that's something that we find is really key. So that being able to kind of have that flexibility, that adaptability, is something that really helps with speeding it up compared to individual product improvements, for example.
And do you feel that you've got enough success stories now?
I think we're less than 1 year being open, but we have seen a lot of improvement. For example, our Q2 to Q3, we saw 43% revenue growth just on that alone, and that shows us that that impact is there. We just need to make sure that the diverse voices in that industry, in our industry, in so many different industries, are being allowed a seat at the table to actually make those that impact.
Yeah, so essential, isn't it? So Richard, many of the products that you design are frontline products. So for example, NHS face shields, they're immediate, they're tangible, they target specific areas of concern and issues. How important is speed at a product level, and how can you deliver longer term impact when now we're living in a world there are so many interwoven crises?
I think speed is critically important, especially now. As you know, I work in the health tech sector, and the issues that we have at the moment are things like single-use disposable products. So the NHS created its roadmap for 2045, and on the back of that, the Department of Health and Social Care created something called the Design for Life roadmap, which came out last week. So companies are addressing this with scope 1 and 2, but the reality is that scope 3, i.e. the product, that's where the big changes are going to happen. Now, there is a limited amount of time for companies to do this, but kind of on the back of that, because it's health technology, it is heavily regulated. So whilst that change needs to happen at speed, there is an inertia in terms of regulatory and senior leadership teams to kind of embrace it. So it's kind of a push-pull dynamic at the moment. But the Department of Health and Social Care created the roadmap. It's now for companies to interpret how they actually do it, and it's the how that we help companies with at the moment.
Fantastic. So, Bernice, let's come back to you, because fashion is a dirty business, isn't it? We are obsessed.
Filthy.
It's filthy, and we are obsessed with fast fashion. We just can't get enough of it. So can product design, in this case clothing, ever drive change at an industry level, at large, in businesses, if businesses themselves don't redesign themselves? And how long is this all going to take?
When I finished university, I asked myself, how can I best use my creativity and design capability to make positive change and to do good? And I would encourage you to ask yourself this every single day of your life. And I realized, as I mentioned earlier, that clothing is something that has an affinity and with every single person. It affects your mood, your self-image, your confidence, your performance. And so I thought, I'm going to try and use a piece of clothing to change the fashion system. So I started to think how that is even possible by changing the system, the interface, the relationships, the model, everything that's gone wrong about it that is so corrupt, because we can't recycle or just source our way out of this problem. In 70 years of plastic, fantastic era that we've been in, we haven't even recycled 7% of all plastics ever produced, and we're actually still accelerating our use of plastic as much as we know about the problem now. So I started to think, how can you possibly use the minimal resources to actually create maximum benefit? And that was the question. So I started to think about multifunctional garments, because every single thing we use these days is multifunctional. Our car tells us what to do. It drives itself. Our phone tells us where we need to go and who we should be calling, or, everything is multifunctional. And so I designed things like this garment, and this is a fabric that we've been using for 18 years. We haven't changed. We use exactly the same black that does not fade or have any shade difference. So you can wear it as a dress, when it's all done up without a microphone in the pocket. You can wear it as a coat. And then you can detach all of this, wear it as a short jacket or as a tailored skirt with pockets. And in the pocket...
She's pitching her clothing
So
right
good.
now.
I
Doing a great
have
job.
a piece that is 0.1 meter fabric to create a whole new style onto my jacket. So this means that in every garment we create, we actually reduce resource usage, water usage, energy usage by up to 80%, whilst this garment will last you for 18 years and to 80 years. And we actually serve customers from age 8 to 90. And so people ask me, who's our target clientele? I say, anyone alive. And so that is how I attempt to change the way Zara or Shein or anyone actually designs. Because if our first principle of design, following up from that principle I mentioned earlier, is that one garment must equal at least 2 outfits, then our 100 billion garment waste issue, which 1% of it is recycled each year. And by the way, this is year on year, 100 billion garments being produced, which means by the climate target of 2050, we will be 9.5 trillion garments dead in the landfill or in the sea. So the acceleration of change has to happen. And if we can actually, in 2 seasons, reduce 100 billion garments to 50 billion garments. And by the way, Zara and Shein have about 50 seasons a year, which means that we can do that in about a month and reduce it into 10 billion garments. So this is what this forum is so amazing for, because there is a massive disconnect in our world. Particularly today, this is really, really highlighted. The disconnect between material economy, financial economy, natural economy, and digital economy just throws it all in the air and confuses us. We forget where things come from and where they go. And circular model, circularity, is a great ideal. But it's not happening because we cannot close the loop. However many times we recycle, we actually cannot turn waste plastic into fossils. So actually, at best, we can do a helix economy that keeps things in use and keeps things reaping benefit, variety, creativity, newness that we as human beings all want without depleting and damaging people and the planet. So I'll make one last point about how this disconnect can be joined together by one single piece of clothing. Now, a piece of clothing, when it's discarded, most of them goes into the landfill. Or it gets discarded, and then where they come from, dyeing, finishing, all of that, all the wastewater goes into the sea. So this piece of clothing in sourcing level has already caused ocean acidification because all the wastewater, by the way, 25% of the wastewater is generated by fashion. It's filthy. That causes ocean acidification, which means that shellfish can't form shells anymore. So prawns will not happen. Prawn crackers will not happen soon enough if we continue. And that's the sourcing side.
It's outrageous.
And the recycling side, or the discarding side, if this thing goes into the landfill, it causes soil depletion and biodiversity losses. And in this 80 years it takes to just biodegrade a pair of tights, let alone trainers and sportswear and everything synthetic. Methane gas will have been produced constantly, which means that nothing can survive other than cockroaches. And cockroaches is one of the oldest surviving insects in the world. So we will be in a world of no prawns and lots of cockroaches because we don't think about how we actually make clothes and wear clothes. So this is the power that we have to change together, because we are together today across all the different industry sectors to make that change.
Thank you. She makes a compelling case, doesn't she? A fashion show and a science lesson all rolled into one. So from fashion back to urban and rural design practice. Pete, I'm going to come to you. In your world, is it naive to think quickly? Is it naive to try and think about speed, or does good thinking take some time?
Oh yeah, good thinking takes lots of time, but that doesn't mean the two things are mutually exclusive. So we say, you know, learn to think at the speed of an oak tree. So that idea about something being around for 200 years just gives you a slightly different angle on how to view something. But we're also a profession, and there's most of this room and many people online that love the idea of the blank piece of paper. So, you know, one of the most important and empowering parts of the creative process is the fat pen. It's like, get the fat pens out. That's the thing that really gets things moving quickly. So I feel that one of the ways that we've made that change rapidly is by our size, by the fact that our B Corp certification and the process we've gone through has taught us a different way of thinking. But most importantly, and back to that original question of you can't change what you don't measure, is that process has taught us to measure and record everything. So that idea of having an evidence base, so when a client comes and says, like here, you know, has anybody else reused material before? Yes. Now, it might not be with us, it might be with Sophie and her colleagues on the front row who are part of our learning network. So the idea of the fact that, because, you know, certainly in the built environment world, people say, well, it takes 15 years to build a new district, it takes 5 years to get a planning permission, it's really easy to blame everybody else. But it's also as easy, if you are of the right mindset, to say, you rebuild your operating system, as we have done. Like Simeon, you make it all completely open source, but actually the things you use to help you rewire your system are also open source. So we use a tool called the Climate Positive Design Tool, designed on a kitchen table by a landscape architect called Pamela Conrad in the States. and then put out their open source. It's the most powerful tool to be able to say to a client, if you change that material to that material, your scheme will get to net zero 8 years quicker. Where do I sign? Where do I sign? Now, there's no need to get into the science. There's no need to talk about transportation miles. There's no need to talk about the fact that there may well be a great deal of modern slavery going on at the beginning end of the supply chain process. It's simply, you've got that moment. You've got that moment of, well, why would I not want to be part of that transformation? Because it saves me time, money, improves my ESG reporting. But fundamentally, isn't it just the right thing? So, you know, I think that there's a lot to be said for certainly the built environment world moves much more slowly than even product design, but certainly graphic design and illustration and those things that are relatively immediate. But that also means that we should be making a bigger impact and a bigger change.
Good thinking takes time, doesn't it? We don't have much time, by the way. So moving on now, Lisa, I'm coming back to you. How can we make sure that we tell authentic stories, but that we tell them quickly and that they move at speed?
Yeah, I think, I mean, topical. Today's probably proved that, you know, a red hat and a slogan can accelerate quite scary change and quite quickly. And I think if we can just reframe the use of language, of optics, how can we, you know, drive cultural and social change? Because that's actually what's going to drive the speed. It's not going to be, sadly, us and our little microorganisms chipping away at things. Will obviously have an impact, but we really need to reach sort of wider collective behavioural change. And there are quite interesting ways of thinking about that. You know, we do have a role to play in terms of communication. How do we distill really complex information? How do we educate? But also, I think a topic that's come up today, and it would be really good for us all to think about this, is how are we going to reframe new and the value of new? You were talking about your amazing product. I loved it. I want it. And now I'm like, no, I can't buy it because it's new. But, you know, there's like a real...
Sold.
Yeah. I think there's an internal struggle there. And personally, you know, individually, I know all the things I should be doing, but actually I still do value new.
Yeah.
So that would be my one takeaway today. And I think... did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. How can the stories travel at speed?
I think, yeah, social media. I mean, yeah, and it's quite a scary tool, to be quite honest, and how quickly things can travel. And I think there's a real power in it when it can be used well, and it can come from the bottom up, which is wonderful. It's not all top down. And yeah, we've seen quite quickly, you know, Black Lives Matter movement, Me Too, how these all can sort of really, you know, wildfire is probably the word. So I do see that there's a potential to harness that in the right way. But I think it's about giving it meaning. What is this all for? What is it about? And those two sort of movements and campaigns had real meaning and humanity about them. And it's how do we, create that empathy and storytelling around what is quite drastic things that are happening without it being scary. And, you know, we spoke about it today earlier on as well. Like, how do we actually make it light and joyous and allow conversations and conversation? Yeah, hopeful, because there is hope. So yes, we all have to reframe new and create a hopeful sustainability.
Exactly.
Regenerative campaign.
Yeah, I'm totally up for that. So we're going to move to answer some questions from our online audience in a minute. But we've got one final question as we try to draw the threads together. Are we debating something where there is really no debate? Because actually you're both sides are terribly important and complement one another. So let's go to the business model team then. Where are the integrated points? How can we learn from each other? How does business model affect product and vice versa? Let's go to you first.
I think from our end, our business model couldn't exist without the products, basically. I think that's what we're going to see, a common theme of what everyone's going to be answering here. The products that are based in our space, you know, we make sure that we source about 50% from local businesses to make sure that we're not contributing to too much of our carbon footprint in that sense. And being able to kind of create that level of flexibility as well is really important. So that means that, you know, it's that kind of marrying the two together that kind of creates that cohesive, sustainable kind of mindset that we're able to filter down into our community. I think that's something that's really important.
Simeon, your reflections?
I would say that products are a product of the system that requires them and creates them, and inevitably, I think if you've got different stakeholders asking different questions, then the outcomes are going to be different. And it doesn't mean that you can't be a green company without structural change, but I think, you know, we were making natural personal care products before appointing Nature to the board, but in the time since, and that was only 2 years ago, we've relaunched absolutely everything, and Nature has had a say in all of that, and we've had a much more informed, more interesting conversation along the way. And now when I look at those products on the shelf, I'm like, they were co-designed by Nature. And imagine what the shelves would look like if that was true for all products.
Pete, your reflections, please.
But I had to follow the adaptable skirt, and now I've got to follow that.
It's a tough one.
I would echo the point that the rewiring of our practice, the rewriting of our articles and memorandums, becoming a B Corp, writing entirely new contracts of employment, means that, you know, we have a significant uplift in our turnover and our profitability. Whether there's a straight line between the two of those things, we have a much better story to tell in terms of how one relates to the other. And I think the product, our product is place. And it touches absolutely everybody. So you don't have to buy it. You can walk through All Saints, you can walk through Symphony Park. In 18 months' time, you'll be able to walk through Albert Square without spending a penny. And I think the journey we've gone on to create a new business model for the business that is being handed to the generation after the founders means that it's an absolute win-win. Our product has, whatever that is, our product has exponentially benefited from the two.
Yes, and you've previously talked about being good ancestors, haven't you?
Well, that's my friend, the writer Alan Moore, not the one who wrote Watchmen. You know, and I think it's the most beautiful phrase, but it's also absolutely deliberate. It's that you can't misinterpret that, I don't think.
So let's go to the other side then. Bernice, in fewer sentences, your reflections, please. On integrated learnings from both sides.
Okay.
Which is reflected more in your world than any other, really, because you're talking about products that are transformational as well as the sector.
Okay, I think that regulation and education are the two ends of the spectrum that we are not incorporating fully into our design change. And so if we just quickly think through how not so long ago we were smoking countries and now we're all non-smokers, almost all non-smokers. That took about only 10 years. And that's not because tobacco companies decided to deface their packaging and actually sell less. It's because regulation and public education were in place to say, so we know from 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds that smoking is bad for you. And that's what we really need to do about clothing industry, because it's the only consumer product sector that is not regulated at all. And we are not taught, youth are not taught about the impact as much as they want to become more sustainable. So that is where the missing link is, I feel. And we, as designers and design communities, we can actually repackage all of it, including everything in the supermarket that is encapsulated in plastic. So all our packaging is in a cornstarch and sugarcane made carbon neutral packaging. If we can do it as an SME, then all the Unilevers of this world can do it.
Thank you. Richard, your reflections.
I think the reality is that business models and products are interdependent. I think that design has got a major role with sustainability, so it goes back to scope 3, i.e. the products. We all know that Ellen MacArthur Foundation posits 80% of issues in terms of environmental credentials are at the design stage, which falls into the hands of designers. However, I think that gap needs to be broached a little bit more in terms of designers being more literate and competent to talk at a management level, or feeling that they can talk about the value of design in sustainability, so that organisations and business models can hear more of what we're trying to say. I think this is where it's heading in terms of the value of design and working with business. So businesses do have to be profitable, but they can also be sustainable. And our trick as designers is to understand what that route is going to be and what the methodologies are.
Lisa, your reflections?
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think actually getting brought into a lot of varied sectors, it's very clear that design should have been put in on the board from the get-go. And I think coming from that perspective is really missed in a lot of business models. And that's when we then have to have difficult conversations around why. and sometimes at that point it's too far down the line to really make change, and there's only a certain level that we can go to in terms of, you know, we're not taking the company over and not going to change business models. But yeah, I think understanding the value of design and how that can really impact business models and the end product is all in one.
So I'm hearing that it's all
one
important.
last thing on,
Yes,
on our side,
Yeah.
because this
Yes.
is actually
You're making
the
one case.
corrected stat from Richard last night. 70 to 80% of the environmental impact are set at design stage. So that's how much responsibilities we have.
But it's all important, is what I'm hearing. So there's a couple of questions coming in from our online community and from our audience in person. So I'm going to get through just a couple of them. And perhaps our panellists, anyone who feels compelled to answer. For the panel, from Graham Hayes, in the audience today. Hello, Graham. Business model innovation can lead to asking very deep questions about what a business does and how it does it, but also why it does it. Does the panel think that product innovation can motivate the same type of reflection or opportunity? Pete, I feel I'm going to come to you for that one.
No, I'm not the product person.
Yeah, but it all matters. We're all integrated.
I thought it was going to be a question about dealing with uncomfortable things, because I think we all have to go through that. That you do have to ask yourself some uncomfortable questions, and whether that's your team coming to you and saying, should we be working for this person on these things? And you know, there is always a tension between that, as to surely part of being sustainable and moving towards regenerative is that you have to make sure you don't leave anybody behind. So you need to find those people that you know you can leave them better than you found them. And that's hard. That's really hard. That goes back to Lisa's point around question the brief. Always question the brief. And I think you'll find that you will always end up with a better outcome, product or otherwise, if you do that all the time.
Question the brief.
Yes, it's my
that must
favourite
be
thing
very
to do.
familiar for you, coming from the marketing communications world.
Yeah.
So the next question that I have, I'm actually going to send your way. Is collaboration of various brands with their products and or services a probable way to align business models to achieve a more cohesive and purposeful design for the planet? If so, what is your suggested examples of approach to convince? You may not think of any examples on the spot, but collaboration between different brands is the question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, faith in nature, the fact that you've put out open source your business model. I think more brands should put out, you know, website templates, things like that, all these things that are designed from the bottom up every time. Just share it. There's no need for making really carbon heavy websites. So yeah, there's a lot that can be done, and I think it keeps coming back to this. You know, it's there. A lot of the stuff we need is there. It's sharing it, it's using it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to keep recreating every single time. It's just hard when people don't want to pay you for nothing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
Can I just add to that
Yeah,
as
I
well?
think you should, yeah.
That when it's open sourced and when it's shared, it gets better. You know, if it was just us doing it, we'd be limited by the brains in the room and the people we have access to and our own experiences. But as soon as it's open source and there are others who copy us or take the model or adapt it or whatever, and that is happening, you know, House of Hackney, Better Business Summit, Future Everything, various river nutrient management boards, It was proposed in a recent commission to the Welsh Government as a way of mitigating flood risks. As more and more people take this idea seriously, because essentially wherever there is a board, there is an opportunity to bring on the voice of nature. As more of these boards start working with this model, we learn what works, and it gets better for us, it gets better for them. That's the creativity in it all as well.
Absolutely, and collaboration is a really big theme out of today, isn't it? So finally now, we're drawing the threads together, and so I'm going to ask you to share just one inspiring thought that you would like the audience to take away and to reflect on. So I'm going to come to you, Bernice, in a sentence, sort of one thought.
I think there are different shades of bad, but there should only be one shade of good. That is collective.
Oh, how do I follow that? You're very good. What a find, what a find. Yeah, I'll reframe the new.
Reframe the new.
The 80% rule, Ellen McCarthy, it all comes from the design. It all filters down from the design of products and services.
I would say that it all comes back to community and collaboration.
Put nature at the heart of all of your thinking and decision making. Sorry, Simeon.
Give nature a voice and a vote.
Would you like to say anything in addition to that, or does that say everything?
I think it says a lot. Like this was an idea born out of the rights of nature movement and an attempt to integrate that into corporate structures. And one of the reasons we did that was because it wasn't happening nationally. The government wasn't likely to usher in this sort of change, but actually businesses can change their articles and change what they are pretty quickly. We can begin acting as if nature does have rights within the ecosystems that we create. And that's a really creative space, and it's completely flipped my perception of the law as well. Like, the law is a story, and the law is a story we can change, and that is a creative space to start playing around in, even dusty corporate law. And I never thought I'd be saying this. But it is interesting.
That brings us to a close with almost 3 minutes to spare. There you go, we've been very efficient. Big round of applause for our panel.
We should clap for nature. We should clap for nature.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to our brilliant team, and beautifully compared, thank you. Right, we are leaving you briefly. We will be back soon.